Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of IQVIA, the Masters of Healthcare Data, and my association, GIRP, the European Healthcare Distribution Association, it is my greatest pleasure to welcome you here to this session called Medicines in Shortage, Time for Action. And this actually should not only be the title of today's session, but is an urgent call to decision makers and authorities that we would like to point out during today's session. So my association, GIRP, is representing more than 750 pharmaceutical wholesalers in more than 33 European countries. We are distributing the amazing number of more than 50 billion packs of medicines every year. And having said that, you can imagine that when it comes to shortages, this is a problem that we really struggle with each and every day. Oops. Yes. Sorry for that. So, before we kick off the session, let me share with you 3 short thoughts about shortages. The first one is we lost too much time in dealing with shortages. I've been participating in a task force that the Austrian authority established about 3 years ago, and we wasted about 2 years with a discussion whether shortages would even exist, and if so, who would be to blame for them. This was really a waste of time. On the other hand, the pandemic significantly changed shortages. I think that's what IQVIA pointed out in their newsletters. Before the pandemic, shortages mainly used to affect multi-source products, and it was only national in most of the cases, affecting just a few countries, whereas now we are seeing an increasing number of shortages that are pan-European and actually affecting the whole of Europe. So what I'm asking for and what I would like to see discussed during today's session is what we see in GIRP is that there is a huge number of initiatives at the moment trying to deal with shortages, but what it needs is a coordinated approach because only then, this is our full conviction, there is a chance to mitigate, because I don't think shortages can be solved, there is a chance to mitigate shortages and to help patients to get their medicine whenever they need it at the right time and at the right place. So having said that, I would like to introduce to you our moderator, who actually doesn't need to be introduced, but nevertheless, Richard Bergström is not only a member of the board of the European Health Forum Gastein, he's also Vice President European Affairs at IQVIA. He used to be the Director General of EFPIA, as well as the Swedish Industry Association, and he was appointed Swedish Vaccines Coordinator back in 2020, I think. So, Richard, the floor is yours, and we are very much looking forward to an interesting discussion with our expert panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bernd. Thank you, and thanks for agreeing to organize. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thanks for agreeing to organize this with us, Bernd. So we'll start with, I would like to introduce the panel, and in the spirit, the Gastein spirit, you know, we have always broad representation from different parts of society. So I will start with that, and then we'll move on with the presentation later. So first I have to my left here, immediate left, Anka Toma, who is Executive Director of the European Patient Forum, the leading voice of patients in Europe. And you have a number of member associations in the countries, and they have patients, of course, in their membership. Now they have Dimitra Pantelli, who is an academic based in Berlin still, right? No, you moved to yeah, close. And then you are active at the European Observatory of Health Systems and Policies, and you are co-author of this very good report on antimicrobial resistance, which we also actually will come back to, because one of the purposes of this panel is to connect the dots between the different policy areas, not dealing with shortages in isolation. It's actually linked to a number of issues. And then we have Victor Mendonça, who is representing Medicines for Europe. You actually worked for Medicines for Europe before, but now you work for Viatris, which is a company with maybe the broadest portfolio of any company, ranging from in-patent to off-patent medicine. So very happy to have you here. And then we have online my former colleague when I worked for the Swedish government, Malin Grape. Hello, Malin.
Hello, thank you for inviting me. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in Gerstein today.
No, I know, but you were here last year, so that was good. And Malin is the global ambassador for AMR for the Swedish government. And I will ask you later to comment on the presidency. And I think this report was actually made for you, and you were one of the on the editorial board for the report. Okay, so thank you, Malin. And we'll come back to you later in the panel discussion. Now, I have asked my friend Per. I was supposed to make this presentation, but Per was able to come himself, so it's better that the subject expert will present. Per Troin is my colleague at IQVIA, and you know, can I say veteran from all IMS. So he's going to show a few slides about the state of play on shortages.
So if we get the slides up, please. I'll talk a little about, with 3 slides, about the level of shortages in Europe just now. And I actually have data that's just a few weeks old on the status. We have about 9,000 individual shortages in European countries just now. It varies a lot between different countries, and actually Sweden just now report the highest number, 827. And if we go through the scale, we actually have very different level of reports in the different country. In Denmark, for example, a very similar country in many respects to Sweden, only reports 73. The reasons why they're different is that countries functions different, and as we said, Denmark has a very unique generic system for the retail market. That matters here. And they also have other proactive things that they're doing. And we also take different decision as national competent authorities when we publish the market authorization holders' notifications. So Denmark actually take away everything they don't think matters, where Sweden actually have every report in that they can get hold of. Next slide, please. As Bernd said, what we see on this list have changed. After COVID, we have a very big group of pan-European shortages. In 2019, we actually found 4 products that we thought had shortage in more than half the countries. And now we have a list of probably about 30 here, and here is the top 20. Many of these are antibiotics, and many are pain products. Many of them, and I can say that already, is that because we have seen inventory buildups during COVID, we saw a very low demand. We saw manufacturers trying to get their inventories down and producing much less, and demand came back much stronger than we had expected, and suddenly the whole system is in disarray here just now. Things moves up and down on the list here, and it moves up quite up and down quite rapidly. Next slide, please. We have very little shortages that is on protected products. When there is a single manufacturer and he has a very high price, he has a very high incentive to keep a big inventory. Although it happens we get shortages there, we know that on obesity products. So most of the product we see shortages have lost protection, and it's either the original product that has lost protection or the generic part. The majority of the product we have is multi-source. There is alternative manufacturers for it, but in some market, like here in Austria, that might not help us as much. A shortage is a shortage in many situations. We also have a lot of single source product. We have a problem that small volume, old product, and many times to quite low prices seems to be lost in the system, and we have very high numbers of shortages on this. I was asked to do a very short version of this, so I can get the last slide. We have built a database that, with web scraping, artificial intelligence, machine learning, build a database of everything we have in Europe. We use all our IQVIA reference data, and we merge it with all of our consumption data, so we actually know if a product is important or not important. This platform is out with quite a few national competent authorities, either in the beta testing or in ongoing use. We also write a little newsletter on it. It's a 10-page report on what we see in this data. Now, if you send me or Max Newton an email, I'll send over the report to you. Now, we are not putting the report on our website, easy to search, and it's a very practical reason. When we had done our first iteration of this, we realized that the more information, the more detailed information we spread to the press, the more stories we get in the newspapers, and the more hoarding activities do we get. So we realize that in the interim, this might be counterproductive that we give it to the wrong audience. And it's also so that we want the national competent authorities to be comfortable with what the information is and know as much as possible. So when it in the end is with the press, it is actually well known and they can answer it. That was my presentation.
Well, thank you.
I hope for a lot of emails.
Thank you, Per. And we'll keep this slide up for a few seconds so you can type down. So you can type the email address. But it was very interesting. Both Per and I attended a workshop at the European Medicines Agency. Some of you may have been there, or at least online, and that was so interesting to hear how first there was less finger pointing than before, but also there was all this discussion about how we manage the media and the press and the behavior that will happen. You know, you have some celebrity that goes out on Instagram and says something, or some celebrity on UK TV that mentions that HRT is the best thing ever, you know, hormone replacement therapy. Suddenly there's a spike in demand, you know. So we have these cases, right? But I think we're going to talk now more about the sort of root causes of this, which is more systemic, you know. And there was a session yesterday at the organized by the EMA, I think in this room, wasn't it? Did anyone attend that on affordability, availability, access? So there was a link, clearly a link to this session as well, about how these things are connected, you know, whether companies launch in all countries and whether they actually make the products available in a continuous manner. But of course, Anka, you know, we need to start with you, because your members, which are the patients, and I told you to be blatantly cruel or honest with us. And if you have some stories to share about, you know, what's the frustration in the patient community right now?
Thank you. Good morning. Is it still morning? No, good afternoon. It's 1 minute past noon. Thanks for the invitation. And Richard knows I was really, really keen on switching logistics to be here, because shortages are they're a very important topic for our community at the moment. Not just triggered by what happened last winter with the massive shortages in antibiotics, in paracetamol. I mean, who would have imagined? But also because, of course, we're having a discussion on the future legislation and how that can restructure the supply chain management in a way that ensures that approved medicines are also available. I have to say it, shortages affect patients because they create anxiety, because they interrupt treatment, because they can trigger switches, they can trigger improvisations, they can trigger people take less medicine, self-censor, if you want, in how the people change doses. They start rationing. Practitioners, prescribers, dispensers are stumped because they don't often have replacements, or the replacement therapies can be detrimental. They can cause additional burden to patients. So it's quite an existential issue for a lot of people. And if we're looking at the antibiotic shortages, I mean, we're talking about life and death. And in the antibiotics case, and I know this is the cue to Malin, in the antibiotics case, they can trigger inappropriate substitutions that then contribute to antibiotic resistance. So, crucial issue for patients. We are very keen on being here and contributing to designing solutions. We are also very keen in having patient-reported shortage incidents, which is not something currently in the plans. And we're also very keen at contributing to a discussion about using the data we have, using the information we have, using the existing systems to think and to design ways to prevent and mitigate shortages.
Oh, it's very clear from the conversations that I and Per and colleagues have had with both patient groups, but with those that sit in the system every day, logging in on the computer every morning. If you just have a few more weeks, 1 week, days even, or months, you can avoid that patients get exposed to this. That you don't go to the pharmacy and find out, oh, we don't have it. But if you already up front basically are explain to you that, okay, we're going to switch you to this one instead, you know, this is just as good and so on, right? Isn't that the whole purpose of this?
One pharmacy is not the issue. It's 5 pharmacies, or the pharmacist telling me, oh, my distributor doesn't have it. No. So that is the issue. And having that little bit of extra time is really important. Sometimes there are no substitutions. And I mean, you can't predict the Suez Canal getting stuck. Really, there are some things.
Or the tornado in North Carolina that knocked out the factory.
You know, but and certainly no one could have predicted Russia invading Ukraine, which caused a whole lot of problems for the border countries. Right? There are some things that cannot be predicted, but there are also, coming from my membership, there are therapeutic areas in which patients can literally set their clock every year according to when they expect a shortage. And that ain't right. It just ain't right.
No. Well, then also what I learned at this workshop at the EMA is that there are shortages that are not even recorded as shortages. Immunoglobulins, for instance, where, you know, we've had a collective shortage for a long time. So what the physicians have to do is to actually start giving people lower doses with consequences, right? But that's not showing up on any list somewhere, you know. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, the EMA had a whole breakout session on that, so it's now recognized as an issue.
No, but anti-inflammatories, for example, in southern countries, they have regular shortages or reductions in stock that threaten patient. Right. You can't really forgo anti-inflammatory treatment.
No. I'm going to later on after the panel, I'm going to invite my colleague Per to reflect a bit on the early days in the pandemic. There were some behaviors, you know, some justifiable and others not justifiable, you know, which we need to learn from. Okay, so I'm going to turn to Dimi. You know. You and I were at this policy forum round table here the other day, you know. Do you want to, I mean, you move around with all the policymakers, health ministers, and you're involved in a number of projects with the observatory and so on. So how high on the agenda is a leading question. How high on the agenda is this for policymakers and politicians, Demi?
Thank you, Richard, and thank you for the invitation to participate. It is higher in the agenda than it used to be, which is a good thing. I think we've been discussing shortages in Gastein for a while, but it used to be specific countries who were bringing the problem. We had especially countries with relatively low prices whose medicines were being parallel exported to other countries, and so they had issues. And these were mostly the ones motivated to talk about these things. What we see now is that basically from every country, we hear the aspect of shortages as a big issue. And I think that it reflects the shift that Per was talking about earlier. It reflects also a shift in media coverage, particularly because of last winter where we had really obvious areas where that's not all right, like children's antifebrile medications, for example. And so what we see is that it's arrived as an issue on the policy agenda in the way that it has been concerning all of us who have been working in this area more specifically in the past few years. Maybe a couple of examples. We had here before the European Forum started the Austrian Health Forum, and the Austrian Minister of Health was there. He reflected very clearly on the fact that this is a problem and this is a priority. We at the Observatory are doing together with the European Commission a consultation process for setting the new priorities for the next Commission and the next Parliament. So we've had a couple of discussions on this, and one of the areas that we discuss is access, and the issue of shortages came up there from very high-level people, including from the European Commission. So I think it's fair to say we've landed somehow.
Right. And the point I made earlier about connecting the dots between the different policy areas, we're going to do a deeper dive on antimicrobial resistance later when Malin comes in. But how do you see this being connected to other policy discussions? We have a proposal now from the European Commission on a revised pharma legislation, where this is in there,
absolutely.
And we have the maybe not HTA regulation is maybe not relevant, but where do you see the relevant policy areas where this need to be considered?
So I think Anka was already mentioning that there is a lot of discussion now because within the pharmaceutical legislation revision package there are clear measures for shortage mitigation. We saw already that within the European Health Union initiative the mandate of the EMA was extended, and HERA was also linked to the management of shortages, but this is particularly for crisis preparedness and response. And what we see in the shortages that we have is that not all medicines would fall necessarily under this category. So we have in the legislation revision proposal, we have measures that extend beyond that and that look at manufacturers who have to have contingency plans more clearly, at national competent authorities and the EMA increasing their role. Also, they look at the possibility of a voluntary collaborative mechanism for European countries to be able to help each other out. Now, the question is, if you have pan-European shortages, is that helpful? So then we can discuss that perhaps a little bit later. To create the link to AMR, I think very important, as we saw, a lot of the medicines in shortage were antibiotics. A lot of the antibiotics in shortage are access antibiotics, so the ones that are least likely to develop resistance. And what you do when you don't have those is that you use less appropriate, broader antibiotics, which then drive resistance even more. So I think one link there to make is that part of the package for revisions is the Council recommendation for tackling AMR, and I think we can't really do that if we don't ensure that we have the antibiotics that we need to treat appropriately when we need them. So that's a very clear link, I think, to the shortage issue.
Right, so we're going to hear Malin Grape later talk more specifically about the Swedish presidency conference and conclusions. But as you said, there are now work underway, and we have actually Damiet Onderstall from the DG HERA. You're familiar with the new DG, which was this a spin-off of Sante? I'm allowed to say that, but anyhow, it was consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Authority. And in their work plan, which you can find on the homepage, they will work on voluntary solidarity sharing between countries. And in fact, that's very much inspired with what happened during the pandemic, where, and you may not know this, that there were hundreds of millions of vaccine doses that were redirected even before they were shipped, you know, after they had manufactured them, Pfizer, Moderna in particular, those two ones we used. So the week before, we told them where to send them, you know. So send them to Spain or Portugal, where the demand was much higher than anticipated, and less to some other countries where it was less. We even shipped, I think, 20 million doses physically from one country to another in moving things around, you know. So that's an interesting learning. One thing that we've observed at IQVIA is that, Commissioner, welcome, is that, you know, that was, of course, only made possible thanks to the fact that we had English packs and we had no leaflets. A few countries required leaflets printed at the pharmacy, but so this is something that we need to reflect on, you know, going forward. Maybe for all medicines, but at least for those that are on a critical list, you know, that we have the ability to move things around. And wholesalers and also parallel traders play a role here, actually, and it's not always so easy for them to move things around. Now, yesterday we had the session, EMA had the session here, and I asked the question to Tony Humphries, which I now want to build on, turning to Victor, you know, representing the Medicines for Europe. And yes, we do have problems with what I call single source patented products. So my old members when I was FPR, there are issues there as well. Could be spikes in demand. We mentioned a few examples. Or it could be that there's basically a tornado or you know, some problems with the factory, right? But most of the shortages are indeed reported in the multi-source space where, and I asked that question to Tony Humphries yesterday, no one is really in charge. You can ask each company to have a plan to avoid shortages, but we've created a generic market, which we're very happy about because we have very good prices off patent. We're very happy about that as taxpayers. But we've deliberately created a system where we don't want someone to have a monopoly. We don't want someone to be there forever. We want them to come in and out, you know, every 2 weeks or every month or every 3 months or something, right? So Victor, you represent the association for these companies. What are your thoughts on that? And you were there as well, heard Tony yesterday, you know, on his comments. So how do you see, what's the best way? I mean, you're not allowed to talk to your competitors. You can't coordinate this. Then it'll be a cartel. So what's the way to make sure that we match this supply and demand that Tony talked about yesterday?
First, thank you very much for the invitation from GIRP and IQVIA to join. Indeed, on the off-patent side, having multiple players on the market, having one company that has shortage does not mean that there is a shortage for patients, right? So brings an extra level of complexity because one company alone cannot solve it. I think part of the answer to this question has a lot to do with predictability, right? What is going to be the demand and how much each company needs to supply. And here there is a gap at the country level, at European level, in terms of collecting the information to understand what is going to be the demand. And thinking about the antibiotics and the crisis that we had last year, this was part of the problem. Not only, it was multifactorial, but not knowing what each company needs to supply and when and in each country makes it hard for the players in the market, for each company to adjust their supply, right? I think the answer for all of this, so the predictability, the managing of the information, and giving that visibility to the players is a good way to start to solve this. But there are other dimensions, right? There is a European dimension. There is a national dimension, and there are also regulatory measures that could be taken, but also market side, right? So from the European level, and now as an industry, we are very much engaged in a collaboration with EMA, with ERA, on sharing information to try to prevent that a similar situation on antibiotics will happen this winter. Hopefully we are on the good way there. Even yesterday I had the opportunity to join a call with ERA and some member states, and let's say it's looking good or better than the last year's situation. That was the information that was shared in the call, but IQVIA and EMA really took that role that you mentioned of collecting the information from different players, which each individual company cannot do, but they can. Put that together with a model that predicts what is the demand and try to match what is the supply capacity of all the players combined with what is the foreseen demand, right? And then looking at that data, try to understand where there might be gaps and where the companies could fill those gaps by increasing production, for instance, which is not always very easy to do, and especially in the case of antibiotics in a highly concentrated market on the API and on the manufacturing side is not very easy to do. There is definitely also at European level a role, and the pharma legislation addresses part of that on the regulatory side. In my view, the measures, or several of the measures that are in the pharmaceutical legislation, in the pharma pack, they focus a lot on monitoring shortage and on reactive measures like fines, but not that much on preventive measures, trying to foresee and try to prevent that those shortages will occur. So that's something that can be discussed among the different players. Then there is a market part, right? And we over the years, indeed, the off-patent sector, the promise, the value of the off-patent sector is really to make medicines affordable and accessible to all, right? But the systems are very efficient in lowering the price to very extreme cases, right? And this, of course, leads to market concentration. Some players leave the market and leaves very little room for redundancy. If a company wants to hold more stocks of a certain product, like antibiotics, this has a significant cost, right? And in a market where there is intense competition and the price is the driver of the market dynamics, you cannot really afford to build costs on costs on costs to be competitive on the market side. So I think that part also, mainly at the national level, countries need to work on. And we've seen very good examples, Sweden being one good example, increasing the roof for antibiotics on the tender market, but there are others. Romania, Portugal, Bulgaria, Slovakia, several countries have introduced mechanisms, not, let's say, structural mechanisms, but more mechanisms that were designed to address the inflation topic, right? Of course, on top of all of this, we are in a very high inflation times, and this adds to the cost part. And these countries have introduced measures that will give some relief to the companies to cope with increasing costs on transportation, on energy, on supply chain, on all these elements. So this market part also needs to be addressed. At the end of the day, I think that there is one point. If we put all the players together in a room, no one has an interest in having shortage, right? It's bad for everyone. It's bad for starting with the patients. For sure, there are the ones that suffer most. But then for the companies, for the regulators, no one has an interest. We also all want to solve this issue. We all want to make sure that there is security of supply and that the patients, the medicines get to the patients when they need it.
Right. Now, it's interesting your reference here to sanctions, right? It's very easy to resort to that. And we have one member state, I won't mention the name, but that recently introduced sanctions, you know. And actually the expert authority, the national competent authority, didn't suggest it. They said that's not going to work. But politicians needed to do something. But we have examples of that, don't we, Per? Of countries where you introduce sanctions, actually counterproductive. So I have one country in Europe where one of the biggest, one of your members, Victor, you know, they looked at their portfolio and a third of them they took off the market because they didn't want to take the risk of having to pay sanction for not reporting a risk of shortage. And for the other third, they reported risk of shortage. And for a third, they didn't say anything, you know. But I mean, how helpful is that? I mean, first you lose all these products potentially, from price competition and supplies. So I think, sanctions is not the way forward, we believe at IQVIA. We think it's much better with, transparency measures and so on. And it was also interesting, Victor, that you point out the fact that payers also play a role here. But I heard yesterday from Tony Humphries here on this panel, the recognition that the EMA has an important role to play, even if they're not really in charge. I mean, I heard Maria Lamas at this workshop at the EMA, the head of the Spanish agency, say, well, I'm not really in charge of this, but someone has to convene this meeting. And I think that was very fair. I think a good way forward. So I think we're all happy that the EMA is stepping into this now as well. And also, of course, supported by the draft pharma package. Now we're going to turn to Malin up in Stockholm. You don't have any snow yet, do you?
Not yet, though.
Not yet. I spoke to Malin earlier today, and I was telling her about the beautiful weather we have here, just to annoy her. But anyhow, Malin, good to see you. So you had I have two questions for you. I'll give you them right up front. So one is about the Swedish presidency, and you had a conference on AMR. This report from the observatory was part of that. You had some very, I think, forward-leaning council conclusions, which I'd like you to talk about. And then if you could talk about your sort of pilot, is it still a pilot, where you're actually working with some producers to make sure that there is capacity, what do you call it, reward models, you call it, I think, for incentive models, for make sure that there are adequate supplies. So I'll leave you to format those two questions, Malin. Over to you.
Thank you so much. So first of all, as you say, we finished our presidency of the EU Council in end of June. And we're really happy, of course, to first of all putting AMR back on top of the political agenda. I guess that was maybe expected from Sweden, but also very, obvious for us that this is something we would focus on. And you mentioned the council recommendations. That is one of the really important achievements, I think, during our presidency, because as you know, they were presented fairly late. So in a really short time, we managed to negotiate and adopt these recommendations. And that is really thanks to the cooperativity and the high ambitions of member states, and also really good collaboration, of course, with the EU Commission. So we were happy to see that even quite difficult things as specific targets on reduction of consumption of antibiotics for both animals and humans were something that member states really could agree on together. So we have now new, ambitious and forward-looking council recommendations to implement over the EU. Secondly, and you mentioned that too, during our presidency, we also chose to organize a high-level meeting on AMR. And we discussed how the EU can contribute to progress on the global level with the upcoming high-level meeting on AMR in the UN General Assembly next year as one of the important processes where EU can contribute. And then we had a chance to also focus and dig deep down into the challenges of access and innovation. So we talked both about access to existing antibiotics, access to new antibiotics, and of course how to stimulate research and development of new antibiotics. And on the basis of this policy brief that you showed that the European Observatory of Health Systems and Policy developed for us, we also had an expert meeting where we could really, twist and turn and look at all the different challenges and the possible measures to be taken. And I think there was good agreement among the member states that this is something, it's a circular problem. It's something that will never stop. We will always have a need for new antibiotics as we have resistance development coming from the use of the antibiotics we have. So an end-to-end approach, a package of different types of measures is what is needed. And we looked at the many possible proposals that we have on the table. And we are really happy now also to see that some of this is taken forward through the agreements of the Council recommendations, but also through the work of HERA. And of course, we're still waiting for the outcomes of the negotiations of the pharma package. But this was also a chance for the member states to prepare for these processes and dwell into the complexity of these challenges and possible solutions.
So before you get to the pilot programs, I just want to insert something here in case people are wondering, saying, well, what does AMR got to do with shortages? Just to remind you that, I think we are pretty good in Europe. Some countries are better than others, in preserving the antibiotics. So we have penicillin V, which is this basic one. And as long as you can use that, you use that. But if you have resistance pattern is adverse, you go to amoxicillin, a combination with clavulanate acid. And if you don't have those, what are you going to do? You're going to take doxycycline or other stuff, which are much broader. So clearly there's a link here. If you have a shortage of the basic antibiotics, there's really a risk of drift in resistance. So this is another, in the spirit of this connecting the dots, the policy areas are all connected, right? And that's also a way to maybe get more sort of political momentum as well, that you point out there's actually more than the most immediate concerns of patients. It's actually a longer-term public health problem. So, but Malin, tell us about what you've been piloting with the industry on supplies.
Yes, so this is really a response to this. We, Sweden being a small market with a quite successful stewardship program, we are not very interesting as a market, for example, for new antibiotics. So what we did was to develop a model with a revenue guarantee, so paying for access instead of consumption of the actual product. And this has been piloted now, just concluded, and the evaluation, of course, it shows that we, through this model, got access to several antibiotics which are not available on the market in comparable countries. So it's really been working for us. Some countries may be complaining a bit that we are not paying what they call our fair share. But that's when they talk about incentivizing development of new antibiotics. So to keep this a little bit apart, we must remember that this model was designed for access to new but already approved antibiotics. On the other hand, the model itself, so that's, I think, Sweden's contribution also to development of new antibiotics. The model could be adapted also to be used for incentivizing development of new antibiotics. So we tested it, and it's useful for the purpose that we designed it for. This model can now be taken forward through HERA in a voluntary approach, for example, between the EU countries. What we have also done now, after conclusion of this pilot, is to also request our governmental agencies to try and adapt this model to fit also for existing and older generic antibiotics. So that's a second pilot program that we will be starting to ensure access also to existing and older antibiotics. And just linking to this also that yes, we are suffering from not getting access to antibiotics. Sweden is also an example of a country where we suffer from withdrawals of existing antibiotics from the market due to failing profitability. So I think we have to see this as again, in a holistic way. And when we talk about AMR, of course, the main purpose of our work is not to counteract or overcome AMR, but it's to assure that we have reliable access to effective antibiotics for all our patients.
Right. Thank you, Malin. What I appreciate with what you said and the spirit of your presidency program as well, is this recognition that there's no point in bashing and finger pointing, but rather looking at how does this work, recognizing that maybe some prices are too low and so on, right? So I think that's very constructive. So thank you, Malin. I hope you can stay on. You'll be off screen though for a while we take some other questions. But if there's something specific on AMR, we will come back to you. So now let's see here if we have any. Do we have any? We have a younger Steiner sitting here servicing us.
Everyone.
So could you tell us if you have anything online that we should discuss here?
Yes, exactly. We actually have a question what is connecting to one of the previous sessions, and also Sweden's public health body, and Sweden was already mentioned before. So basically, they are stating that in one of the previous sessions, Sweden's public health body is encouraging people with chronic diseases that they should ensure that they have at least 1 month supply of their treatment over the winter. And they are asking if you think this is the right approach to go forward,
right.
Because it seems to be encouraging patients to hoard.
Yeah, thank you, Anniko. Thank you, and that's a perfect cue to Per Troin here, because you looked early in the pandemic at behavior of physicians and patients and so on, and even now with this HRT boost in the UK, how did people behave?
Now, as we have said, we have a delicate situation in the supply chain in general, and the issue of hoarding can be a significant issue for many countries. And when Sweden, the Department of Health issued this recommendation a couple of weeks ago, we have to understand how the Swedish system works then. So for chronic medication, you actually get a script, which is called an iterated script. You can fill it 4 times over a year. So it's a year's supply. Each time you get 3 months supply. And when you ask a question or making a suggestion like this, the next 2 months, what will happen is that 3 months supply will suddenly disappear from the shelf. Well, that means that the wholesaler's inventory lose 1 month's inventory direct. Now, so if I ask Bernd here, what's the typical inventory at a wholesaler, he would say, 28 days or something like that. So yes, Sweden will most likely in our next report in 2 months have another 150, 200, 300 shortages. So it's a slightly dangerous approach to be done. We have to say that they had a little pre-announced this to the manufacturers, so maybe they have ordered slightly more. So maybe the effect is not as big. And secondly, Swedish wholesaler actually, because we have something called a single channel system, has a slightly bigger inventory. So, but it's a very risky type of thing of doing. And quite honestly, I think what we learned from COVID is that, and I worked in Sweden on COVID, on the thing that we had shortage on. The best thing is that the center can control where inventory is sitting and decide which hospital, which regions have the many intensive care unit patients and so on to utilize the inventory the best. So in theory, this is slightly counterproductive, but it is, let's call it a popular thing for feeling good. And then longer term, naturally, maybe there should be a recognition to people that in normal, don't try to fill just the very last day, but actually fill a few weeks before. But when you send something like that out in the press, you have a big risk.
Yeah, I think unfortunately this is an example. And sorry if I step on some toes, but I think I would wish to see more of street knowledge and market understanding when policy proposals are put forward. We have elements in the pharma package, which clearly, we can talk about that some other time, which are not recognizing the realities like launching in all countries. If you're a very small Boston-based startup, you know, I mean, are you really expected to launch in all European markets? It's about making available in all the markets. Anka?
A comment on that. Can I just take a minute to think about the term hoarding? So if patients do it, it's hoarding. If supply chain actors do it, it's called stockpiling.
No, I fully agree with you. It's the wrong word.
Okay, let's not punish patients for not trusting that the system will deliver their medicines, okay? The problem is not patients who are scared. The problem is that patients are scared. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, what we've seen is that in a crisis, there was a possibility to act at the continental level, at the EU level. So this is where I go speak freely. But you see, I mean, it's going. We saw last year that the EMA received a mandate to act, to coordinate, and that helped improve the situation. The MSSG acted. There were some derogations. Parallel trading was facilitated to move stocks around. The third thing is it's really important. Transparency is important. And it's not because a message gets the wrong way into the media. Transparency is important because transparency improves trust. And then if patients trust that they have access to information and that information is made available in some form, then I assure you people will not react in panic to the same level. Now, what we've seen in COVID, speaking of, you know, HRT is a fad. But lupus patients had a massive problem during COVID because of Trump, right? Because that hydroxyquinolone thing that Trump was trumpeting is an essential medicine for a patient population that is not very large, and that was confronted with massive shortages and induced anxiety. Yeah. And fear. So, I mean, there are the infodemics. It's a random example, but of course, misinformation has a role. But the antidote to misinformation is information.
Yeah. No. Fortunately, the advice on drinking bleach was not followed, but this certainly had an impact. But I absolutely take your point about choice of words, okay? So we saw that. Actually, I was during the pandemic. I was working with the Swedish government, part of the Commission team, you know. But Per here was been at IQVIA for a while. Did the studies on this, you know, where you saw that. To your point, Anka, that even if there's no recommendation from the government, if you are 75 and frail and you have your 3 chronic medications, and if you've been told that you're going to go in lockdown, what are you going to do? Of course, you go to the pharmacy and stock up. This is what they did, you know, and that's legitimate. I've used the term legitimate hoarding. Maybe I need to find another word for that, you know, but it's a good point. You know, I think going forward, we should reflect on how we talk about this, right? Victor, you want to come in?
Yeah, I wanna make a comment, because maybe there are better ways, right, to utilize the medicines, because hoarding, stockpiling, patient level, country level, at the end of the day, it will lead to waste. It will lead to destruction of medicines, probably medicines that are needed somewhere else. It will lead to AMR, potentially, with the destruction of those medicines. So there are a lot of negative implications. Indeed, we need to fix the root cause, making sure that the patients are secure in getting access to their medicine, so they do not need to hoard. But at the country level, and thinking about, for instance, a new measure that was put forward by the German government, actually to hold a stock of 6 months for all the products that are on tender. What are the consequences of such a measure throughout Europe? We are talking about billions of packages that need to be stocked, that are sitting somewhere. Most of them are not going to be utilized, right? So there are better ways to secure patient access to medicines, to avoid disruptions of the supply chains, that taking these very extreme, costly measures that are not efficient.
Yeah, but Victor, there are ways to do this, like throughput or extra levels, not stockpiling in a dungeon somewhere. I mean, I'm Swedish, but I live in Switzerland. And Switzerland has had since Cold War the system where essentially everything in the food store, even Heinz ketchup, everything, it's a 3-month stock rotating, So providing that the shelf life is not short enough, I think one should be able to, with a fairly little cost, be able to have wholesalers keep more stock, and I think that's what Malin is also experimenting at in Sweden, right? I don't know, Bernd, if you want to come in on that, you're representing the distributors after all.
Well, what I would really like to ask for is more transparency in the supply chain, because we've been talking about stockpiling, we've been talking about hoarding. I think there's a very good study carried out by IQVIA about misallocation of stocks in a country. And this is pretty clear that having more transparency on stocks and moving them around, like it would be the case in Denmark, would be very helpful, actually, and it would also prevent waste in the supply chain. This is actually what I would really like to ask for. That Denmark has come through the pandemic actually in a very, very good way. They had little shortages, and this is one of the best practice examples that we should look at. And if we collect all the best practice examples and put them together, we will for sure get a very comprehensive approach that really helps us to deal with the shortages. This is what I'm asking for.
No, and I would also think that it's within the competition legislation, one should be able to actually have this kind of conversation, even between companies. Paddy, do you want to say something?
There is more positive example. Finland has a similar type of system where the wholesaler keep a few more months, and the way it's organized actually add a very minuscule cost to the totality. I also think that we have to recognize that there is very small volume products existing on the market. We talked yesterday about an epilepsy drug for children, which in a country like Sweden is a couple of 100 packs a year. We need more of those with either Nordic packs or European packs, so we can move them around, so we can easily move them around between the countries. And that's investments to generate those new packs and the regulatory processes and so on. But that's something I think regulators should take initiative to secure the availability of some of those that's really, really critical for a small group of patients, but can really help. And that will solve. In Sweden, I see that a normal batch size for generic manufacturer is 10,000 packs. We have a lot of product that's used 3,000 packs a year. Many times the manufacturer's cheapest way is to produce 10,000, and then when shelf life is out, they scrap the 5,000 that's left or something like that. Yeah. That's wasteful. We have to find other ways for this.
Yeah, I don't understand why we still don't have e-leaflets and why we don't have common European packs. It's a mystery to me now. That's another learning from the COVID-19 vaccines, is that we have a central warehouse somewhere. I won't disclose where, but where they are, and then they're sent out, when they're needed. And this is something to be inspired by, both for low volume products and for future countermeasures. Dimi.
Just to weigh in a bit on the issue of transparency and intelligence, and it goes a little bit in this direction, but what we were thinking about in this policy brief on access to existing antibiotics for the Swedish presidency was a couple of levels of this. So one, we have antibiotics that are in different formulations in different countries, so it's not like it's the same products everywhere, and it's not always clear why that's the case. So it might be 125 mg amoxicillin or 135. So one of the suggestions, and we did this with a large expert consultation, so it's not just the ideas of the 3 people who are on the cover, just to not give myself the credit, was that we need a European facilitated mapping of what products we have available. I'm talking about the antibiotics scene now, most of all. And then with that, we could then also concentrate manufacturing on those products to make sure we find out the ones that make the most sense medically. We can concentrate manufacturing on those products. We can facilitate a mechanism where countries can help each other. And then if we land on specific formulations that are the useful ones, we can also harmonize more easily the leaflets, the packaging, so that it is then in a European way more accessible. The other dimension was mapping of manufacturing capacities for different parts of the production chain of antibiotics, because I think the other part of intelligence that we largely do not have at the European level is who is doing what. So in that case, if something happens, who can we turn to for support? And then building on that, clearly the strengthening of manufacturing capacities within the European setting is another option, but this goes further. I just wanted to come in on the potential or the possibilities that we could theoretically think about from the European perspective.
Oh, definitely, and I think I and many others having been in this sort of policy world, I think we've been dismissing all this operations, manufacturing. That's all sort of working. You know, who cares? And now it's maybe we should say supplies in all policies, Dimi. Doesn't sound very sexy, but maybe. We have the honor today to have former Health Commissioner Vytenis Andriukaitis with us here. Commissioner.
If I may, I will ask you a very simple question, because in my mandate time, we tried to develop some cooperation between different groups. Benelux group was started, Austria and or Benelux countries. Then Valletta group united a lot of Mediterranean. Then it was a group between Baltic Nordics. And my question is how those groups show their capacity to act actively, because shortages are everywhere and that's a very complex one. And do they fulfill their obligations to cooperate, to coordinate, to exchange views, to put forward good practices, to react immediately, and to see how, because those groups exist till now. And it would be good to know, because it's always possible to work on voluntary basis, because we have no chance to act from EU level, because it is a regulatory framework absolutely different. It depends on 27 national countries and 27 different regulatory frames. My question is about those groups. Do they show their activities or not in time of those very, very challenging shortages?
Thank you, Vytenis. So these groups, these groupings, initiatives are all about pricing, reimbursement, HTA collaboration, right? Victor, I'm going to give this question to you in 30 seconds, so you can prepare. But it points to the fact that and that's learning from Denmark, for instance. And my question is going to be about that, your experience with whether supply obligations are part of your commercial arrangements and tenders and so on. But this point, some of you attended maybe the session earlier that FPA organized about affordability of medicines, and the point was made both by myself and by Cesar from Spain, about the need to move from being payers to being buyers. So these things ought to be part of your commercial agreements, right? That to build something in. So Victor, what is your experience with that? How common is that? I mean, we have sort of tender-like systems in many countries. Do they typically include obligations? And has there been any change lately?
Maybe just one quick comment on the question about these different initiatives a little bit throughout Europe, and I participated in a few, and I would agree that the motivation was a lot about affordability and joint procurement, which might be counterproductive actually to the idea of stable supply of medicines. But the good news is that I think that ERA has a role to play on the harmonization of efforts throughout Europe, with all the member states for an emergency response, not for a day-to-day response. And I think EMA, with the new mandate, also has a role to play in this coordination. And coordination with the market authorization holders, and we have been very active in many calls with EMA to trying to solve the antibiotics supply for the next season, but also coordinate the member state effort, right? And here there could play these solidarity mechanisms and others. E-leaflets, harmonization of packs for antibiotics is a no-brainer, right? So everything that is able to reduce complexity in the distribution, in the supply chain, everything that creates harmonization, everything that reduces costs contributes to stability of supply. So that's a good way forward. Yeah, typically on the contracts there are fines associated with the non-supply. I think it's a precautionary measure I would not be against. What we see in many countries is that the fines are disproportional, right? If you have a certain contract with a certain supplier that might be worth 100K, and the fine might be even above this value that you are going to make. So it's disproportional, and this creates a negative incentive for any company to be part of that agreement, right? So they need to be balanced, proportional, assess if there is really a problem or a lack of willingness from the market authorization holder to supply, or if there were other situations. But also these procurement agreements, they could consider other elements, right? One element that they could consider and they should reward has to do with security of supply, right? If you include that in your contract agreement, and you put there historical data of supply, holding a contingency stock, and you actually reward the companies for that.
And for transparency, maybe, about where you buy things from.
You are providing a positive incentive for those suppliers to take measures.
More carrots and less sticks, yes.
Exactly. I think it's all about the incentives and finding the right balance. I would like just to say, because we are running out of time, that indeed I think there is something very positive in all of this that has to do with the approach that the Commission, EMA took on this collaborative approach, really speaking with all the stakeholders, listening, and there is, in my view, a genuine interest in finding those solutions. So this is something new, the openness for dialogue, which is very positive, very welcome, and I think all together we can find those solutions.
Right. So, Commissioner, unfortunately, we haven't really seen any traction on joint buying. We have the HTA regulation coming into force now, where it's gradual introduction, right? But there's no sort of buying component in that. And ironically, the United States are now going to do countrywide Medicare negotiations for 10 products. And Europe have had price controls for decades. We still can't do it at the European level. We did it for the vaccines again. And I challenged the industry on this and saying, why not? You know, why not? That's not so much relevant for you, Victor. Well, you have some of these products as well. You have novel, innovative medicines too in your pipeline, right?
Yeah.
In Beatrice.
Can I just one sentence on the joint procurement of vaccines? Products that were totally harmonized, no differences between the countries, no leaflet, no package. Of course, a completely different context, emergency context, and so on. So we are not there.
No.
That could work for emergency situations under ERA. That could work, but we should not disrupt the normal market functioning and supply.
No, I fully agree with you. When I say these things to provoke people, I'm talking about maybe the 2 or 3 really disruptive new stuff coming with huge budget impact. You know, I'm looking at you, Martin, because we were talking about this just before the meeting here. So unless there is a really burning comment from the floor, or if you have some complete Twitter, no, it's not Twitter anymore, what's it called? Storm on the internet, Anniko, we will close here. It's okay, yeah. So we will close here, and I will hand over to, we're very happy to have you, Clemens, here, the president of European Health Forum, Garstein, to say a few concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Richard. Since I'm probably a veteran in this kind of discussions, I'm positively surprised that the quality of our discussions is so much increasing compared with several years ago. You know, I think you already said, you know, it's less finger pointing, etc., etc. Commissioner, to give you an answer, since I was one of the fathers of Benelux, for example, and that very much connects to the topic today. When we founded or started Benelux, we had innovation in mind, high-priced medicines. We didn't regard generics as necessary topic to be on our radar, because the market still was pretty much working. And some of you know that I'm talking about that many years now, you know, after we started Benelux, that the health system, we have two problems when it comes to medicines. The high price of innovation, yes. And I say that for many, many years now, the second largest, and even volume-wise, the larger problem is the generic market and the shortages. And I have to be very honest, since I'm so long in this business, I am one of the people who is also responsible for the shortage topic. Because we were so successful in regulating, at least in this country, but in many other countries, regulating the prices downwards in the generic market. We were very successful. It's a paradox, you know, that our success now creates a new problem. I'm very honest with you guys here. So I think it's high time that the officials in the reimbursement agency, or whoever, you know, it's from country to country very different, but whoever is responsible for the reimbursement, the buyer, so to say, issue, they have to reconsider that. They have to reconsider that the market we created here is really failing. You know, let's say so. So I think we should be very honest and say, okay, stop this paradox success story and rethink it. And Richard, you always reminding me. Several years ago, I started a discussion. You know, we don't pay the right prices anymore. I think that's probably an issue here. What I wish for is that we. And I think, Victor, you said it. You know, we do need a new quality in the policy debate about that. You know, new incentives, and I think it cannot be a rocket science to figure the Danish model out, so to say, to predict the demand and to talk to each other and not blame each other that these things are not working. You know, it's high time for collaboration, since this is not a total free market of cars. You know, it's a market for medicines, life-saving medicines, as Anke said. You know, we should be more disciplined. So my plea is also to the reimbursers and the industry, you know, and the wholesalers and whoever is in this business, talk to each other and find the right solution. So, but once again, the quality of the discussion is getting much better, and I hope in 3 years, 4 years in the Health Forum Gastein, we can say, oh, problem solved.
Thank you. So I'm glad this is being recorded, because people can wind back and listen to Clement's very clever final words. Thank you to all in the room. Thank you to the panel, Marlin, who was online, all of you watching, listening. Thank you so much for your attention. I wish you a good rest of the day. Thank you.